Hey Rebels, welcome to Blasphemous Nutrition. Consider this podcast your pantry full of clarity, perspective, and the nuance needed to counter the superficial health advice so freely given on the internet. I'm Aimee, the unapologetically candid host of Blasphemous Nutrition and a double-degreed nutritionist with 20 years experience. I'm here to share a more nuanced take on living and eating well to sustain and recover your health. If you found most health advice to be so generic as to be meaningless, or so extreme that it's unrealistic, and you don't mind the occasional F-bomb, you've come to the right place. From dissecting the latest nutrition trends to breaking down published research and sharing my own clinical experiences, I'm on a mission to foster clarity amidst all the confusion and empower you to have the health you need to live a life you love. Now let's get started. Today I have the pleasure of interviewing Victoria LaFont. Victoria is an opera singer turned nutritionist turned marketing expert. She has a medically focused marketing agency that has helped hundreds of clinicians go from burnout to career bliss. The LaFont Agency offers marketing copy, strategy, and clinical research support. Their work is based on a bias-conscious interpretation of the scientific literature, translated then into practical content. I'm bringing Victoria into the show today to help us become more aware of our own biases and how to become more street savvy so that we can keep ourselves from getting swept up in the faddish, fashionable, and sometimes misleading content that gets pushed out and interpreted as research. Victoria has designed and researched curriculum presented by the Nutritional Therapy Association. Additionally, she serves on the teaching staff of the University of Western States Human Nutrition and Functional Medicine program. This woman is reading the research daily and is very aware of how marketing is being used to recommend things which are legit and sometimes not so legit. So I'm super excited. We have a fantastic conversation that I think you'll really enjoy listening to. Enjoy the show. Oh my goodness, Victoria. Welcome to Blasphemous Nutrition.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited to have you too. I think because I feel like your ability to explain how we can kind of sort the gems from the shit is probably better. Like, I think you'll be able to explain this better to people than I'll be able to, in part because you're in the science all the time. You're reading research papers all the time. And so you just have more exposure and a more finely tuned bullshit detector. And
I'll take that.
as well as, I think, a stronger capability of parsing out the nuance and a way to explain it to others so that they can start to cultivate that within themselves. So let's actually let people know how you came to that, and especially that unique position that you have in both understanding the scientific literature and the marketing angle.
Yeah, so I am like a total hardcore fascist at heart.
No.
Okay, so let me
You're
explain.
out of the gate, blasphemous.
Good. Yeah, let's go there. I come with a really strong tendency toward bias. When I buy into something or if I think that something is right, I just go so hard in that direction. That's like my natural tendency. So for instance, when I started to play around with nutrition, I was in middle school, high school. I was like, everything, zero fat. I mean, we were all in that culture at that time. I'm in my 40s. I know we all remember like the Snackwell's cookies and the fat-free potato chips, So when I got that into my head, I was like, no fat, zero fat. And then when I was vegan, I was like one of those. So that tendency in me is really, really strong. And then I found the traditional health crowd and nourishing traditions. And then that was the thing. And finally, I was like, oh, there's a pattern here. Okay. I have bias that's really, really strong once I hook into something. So the way that I came into being interested in I really like qualify it like evidence-based medicine or into the scientific literature. It's one part that I look at. And I think it's important because it's most people's weak leg. But honestly, that's why I think it's the most important thing. Is I went to grad school, had really good mentors, and got my ass handed to me. Like, hey, actually, you have no idea what you're talking about. And I was like, okay, I kind of wanted that. I was ready for that.
Totally.
So I just owned it. I was like, all right. And it's this really interesting position to be in, I think, especially as a woman and a business owner. And it's all these kind of different components together. I think sometimes it comes off as the lack of confidence or like imposter syndrome. And it's like, no. What's happening is this combination of I am very, very interested in learning what I don't know. And I think that is incredibly important, not just for me personally, because of I have this bias toward knowledge. So I have that, but also because it's that ability to keep learning and let that door stay open. It looks a little mealy mouth sometimes, or so sure. And it's these combination of things that it's interesting, but the end goal is like, the more we can stay open to what we don't know or try to understand things more deeply, the better we're going to be at understanding what's actually happening. That accuracy is the thing. That's the ticket. Now, yeah, we can innovate. And I am a huge fan. Actually, the only paper that I've ever had peer reviewed and published is on a paradigm of knowledge that incorporates ancestral knowledge, our personal experience, anecdote, what we see in the office, and evidence-based medicine. All of those things are really important. But there has to be some openness to learn that and to get the accurate point out as accurate as we can get as humans, because that's what actually helps people. Us pretending something is happening when it's not actually happening, it's useful for our ego. And then that's it. So I don't know if that draws the line from kind of beginning to where I got to the evidence-based part. And the marketing really came in because I wanted to be a medical philosopher. That's what I was interested in. That's what that paper is really based on, a new paradigm of understanding how information works. But you can't really make money. So philosopher, it's like, I'm sure I could have gotten a PhD and been in academia. Even then, that's a whole other discussion of like academia. Yeah. I'm a really strong writer, a good science writer, and I really like marketing copy. I like copywriting, which is a different art. But yeah, I can meld those things together and do marketing for people, which they really want and appreciate and are happy to pay for. So it was sort of necessity was the mother of invention. Is that how that saying goes? It's
necessity of not being humiliated by your professors, or
well, no, just wanting to make money.
Oh God. Oh, right. So that's why you're not a medical philosopher today.
Yeah. Needing to make a business that was financially feasible forced me into the mission of like, oh, hang on a second. Marketing can actually further the mission of accuracy, good medical care, getting better information out there. These things are not exclusive, right? We don't have to have marketing and good academic rigor. We on separate teams. We can have them on the same team. And so that's what our marketing agency does, is we marry those things. But yeah, the journey to get there, like I said, like the perception of somebody who's in that space is like almost unprofessional, I would say. Sometimes it comes off, there's all these interesting little details that we've explored over the years. But at the end of the day, this is what we're doing. And however it looks is how it looks. The mission is to further medicine with marketing that is evidence-based, it's good science.
So you are exposed to a lot of marketing and you're exposed to a lot of research. What do you see as the biggest fallacies, the biggest shady shenanigans that are used by, and I'm air quoting here, science to further an agenda, be it selling a supplement or public health policy? I think many of us feel kind of jaded in both of those areas. So what are some of the biggest things that you see?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like, this is such a meta answer in the beginning, but it's like, I'm feeling the answer to that question, the pressure of that right now, because it's like when we do marketing, and I'm not a public health professional, so I can't speak to that. But when we do marketing, it's like there has to be some like kind of big picture view that's put out. So a lot of the details get lost. And I'm just like, I'm a detail freak. You got to let that go, to like get your message across to people in some ways. That can be a really difficult balance to strike. It's like physiology, anatomy, biochemistry. These are like elegant, really specific. They're beautiful to me, but it's like, you can't put that in an 8-word headline. It's
Right.
just doesn't work. So when I hear supplements, I kind of think holistic, complementary medicine like that. When I think public health, I think kind of more conventional, although they're not mutually exclusive. But there is kind of a difference in those worlds. It's in the world that I live in most of the time, which is the functional medicine realm. Most of, I think, what we really struggle with is how do we this is what we struggle with in the agency. How do we get across the specificity while making it really, really palatable and practical for people? But I don't think that struggle is as much of a struggle for other, I would say maybe well-known names in this field, because they are just more business people. And there are a lot of people, not all, but there are a lot of people that are in holistic wellness, functional medicine like that. They are business people first, right? We can kind of go into the details of the supplement industry. I mean, I'm sure that your listeners know about that. It's like supplements are not regulated unless there are complaints.
Right.
I mean, protein powder company, it's like we could do anything we wanted as long as somebody didn't call the FDA or complain. And it's like you could sell it, and there was very little regulation. It's self-regulated by and large. So there's all kinds of examples kind of in that realm with holistic medicine. But I think the biggest thing that I see is, there's a lot of business people charading as clinicians because it makes a lot of money. Now, there are actual people who, and a lot of our clients, I mean, all of this is what we do, is the clients that we work with is because they really are interested in trying to get like good science out there in a way that's practical for people and support themselves and their family. And for them, trying to marry the details with the overarching message that they're trying to get across, that's really difficult. It's hard to have that level of detail in marketing or in business. In public health, it's hard for me to speak to that. It's not really my world. I think we've seen there's some serious communication problems. It's like, who is in charge of, who is doing the PR, who's doing the marketing for you guys? I mean, I think in many ways, people are just caught off guard. At the end of the day, I try to just give everybody the benefit of the doubt. Everybody is trying to make this work. Everybody has to pay their bills. Everybody, I think, in their heart of hearts wants to do right by people, or most people in their heart of hearts want to do right by people. Anybody who has been, let's say, in a heated discussion with their significant other, or even, let's say, in a heated discussion with a peer, and you're like trying to communicate your side, and you're trying not to straw man, and you're trying to be as accurate as possible and be humble that you're attached to this thing. It's like they have felt that difficulty in their personal life. It's the same on a larger scale when we go into marketing for anybody, or communication for any, public health. It wouldn't be marketing necessarily, but for their public relations.
So given that layer of complexity and also the need when you are dispensing information to keep it, simplistic enough to be palatable and understood, right? How does the normal person begin to recognize what is shit and what is fertilizer?
Yeah,
Because they look the same. They smell the same.
Yeah, it's good. I mean, it's so funny. I can feel myself struggling with it even as we're talking. I'm like, oh yeah, there are some problems, but even putting your finger on it, what are these exactly? In my daily work, I have to produce content. Like I got to get a finished product out there. I can feel my ability to be discerning, to get really into the specifics of the study, it goes down. I actually like tell clients, there's one client in particular I'm thinking of where I'm like, I can't work maybe as many hours or produce what you want me to produce because this just takes so much time. It is hard. It's hard even for a professional, right? To figure that out. And, I actually liked this, and maybe coming from a place of ignorance. So I'm totally happy to be corrected. But I have a gripe even with how scientific papers are published. I'm like, of course, nobody wants to read that. It's just a huge block of text. The language is batshit crazy. I've been reading primary literature for close to a decade. I still read with a second tab open so I can look up the definitions of words or, that I'm not familiar with. It's really, really hard. So then you take that's your primary source. You filter it through whoever is writing. I hope I'm a clear vessel, but you never know. Some people are consciously not clear vessels because they're trying to, consciously or unconsciously, skew the information how they want it to sound. And then you've got this thing on the other side. Maybe it even goes through a couple more washes of interpretation, and then you get it. God, like, what? Yeah, I kind of had the same question, actually, Aimee. Like, how does somebody who is not familiar or not even a niched expert, right? Like, I will say sometimes, talking to Hannah, is the woman that I work with in the LaFont Agency, I wish there was somebody like us that we could talk to about climate change. I don't know anything, right? Climate scientist, I can totally hear that what's happening, it doesn't sound good. I've never looked at the peer review literature. I don't actually know what's happening with the climate. Are we 10 years out? Are we 3 years out? Because I can see analogously in our world, people make claims all the time. Here's one of the ones that, oh my God, I'm going to wade into the most blasphemous area ever, Aimee. I hear this all the time. Sugar feeds cancer. If somebody has a cancer diagnosis, almost always there's like some little caveats that a holistic clinician will push in, but it's rare. You have to go on a ketogenic diet. If you have this type of cancer, ketogenic diet. And I just happen to have been around people who know enough about that topic to know that claim is baseless when you dig deeply into the primary literature. I don't mean narrative reviews that like draw on rodent studies or cell studies. So for your listeners, I'm just going to caveat or go off on a little tangent here for just a second.
No, I think explaining the terms is important because most of our listeners aren't science data research nerds like you.
Yeah, there's just a tangent for a moment. There's a hierarchy of studies. So, I mean, it's very logical. If you look at something in a petri dish, you're going to see things happen that you might not see if you do an experiment in animals, which is usually rodents of some type. And then in a rodent, they're obviously not the same as a human, right? So, and look, I'm totally guilty of like looking at a cell study and being like, oh my God, this thing that's happened in a petri dish, and then
especially if it confirms our bias.
Oh, totally. I still have that fascist brain, and hopefully somebody's like, hey, dummy, that's a petri dish. That's not a human being. Oh, okay. Thanks. So anyway, this thing with cancer, there's all of this hype that's happened around it with petri dish studies, rodent studies, some limited human data, but people take that, then they kind of like conglomerate all of that information into a review. Maybe it's not a statistical review, which is kind of a more accurate way to put information out. It's what's called a narrative review. It's narrative, right? It's like a really nice book report. Hopefully it's not biased. Usually it is because humans aren't super, super interested in checking their biases. And so then this thing happens. It goes through interpretation. It gets washed and then, put out. So I see things like that and I'm like, well, could anybody ever know? It's like even some people who have been working clinically don't know this or have been studying it, don't know this. You have to take hours and go through each citation and look at the design of the study that was cited. What were the outcomes? Is this actually appropriate to claim when we cite this study? So your question is super valid. It's like, if you're not a niche professional in a field, let's say you're a lawyer. I had this actually come up the other day. we have a mentor that's helping us in a totally different area of life with our retirement investment. Brilliant couple. The man was a lawyer. The woman worked for the government for years. I sent them a paper on the pro-oxidant action of vegetables, which I just think is really cool. And they're farmers. And I was like, oh, I thought you might think this is cool because vegetables actually kind of help us by initially hurting us a little.
Yeah.
People know this. This is a very cool thing. If listeners haven't heard this, when you eat plants, they're slightly stressful for the body, but then your internal response to that stress is so beneficial, it overrides and is highly beneficial outcome of eating plants. So this is actually a great example because that has gotten taken and twisted by some kind of influencer types in the wellness space as they're saying, oh, plants are toxic. And it's like, yeah, yes, you're right. There is some level of stress that we get from plants, but you're leaving off the most important part of the story, which is our response to that is so great that it's totally worth it for 99.9% of people on earth to eat plants. Anyway, to my story, I sent them this paper and he wrote me back and he was like, this is totally over my head. And I was like, oh, I hate that feeling. I was like, this is a cool thing. And he was like, I have no idea what even the abstract of this paper is saying. So to your point, if somebody hears that on the news and they're like, oh yeah, plants are toxic. They get wrapped up into the, oh yeah, my God, sugar is feeding the cancer, or I can't eat plants, they're toxic. Well, there is a grain of truth in those things, but it's not the full story. And where can you go to get the full story? I mean, I don't want to pat us on the back, but that is the goal of this entire agency, is to be like, no, hang on a second. We have to put out the full story so that people can make educated decisions with all of the information, not just a little piece.
Right.
And
Because I think much of the data that's presented, consciously or subconsciously, there is a bias that enables the data presented as evidence to be, that goes into the filtration process of the data. Admittedly, I am more excited about finding research that supports produce consumption than I am about research that doesn't, right? And that is 100% my bias into play.
Yeah.
And, I also, though, in my defense, have factored in clinical experience and then looking at the historical evolution of humanity, right? As part of the story.
Yes. And that's what I wanted to study as a medical philosopher, was there's more than one way to get information, you all. Why don't we talk about this? It's crazy to me that we don't. But I mean, I think the thing that still is not a great practical answer to your question, but is what we try to do on our end, is we have tried to retrain our nervous systems. And this, I'm dead serious, so that we get excited when we get proved wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Makes us, it's like training like a drug dog. It's like we're trying to train our dopamine response to be like, yes, hit when we find something that goes against what we thought, because then we know okay, maybe we missed something, or there is a mechanism here that can help people that nobody's talking about or we're not aware of. Not with the goal of trying to be sleuths that find something new and novel, more just trying to find what is the full picture that at the end of the day is going to be the most helpful to humanity. Because right now, and I don't think this is going to change, just because medicine and wellness, I'm going to put all this together for a moment, and capitalism are entwined. It's just how it works. Based on what we know so far, capitalism is the best system that we have. I don't want to bust it, because I'm well, there have been many other forms of commerce that have not worked out super well. So we've got capitalism. But there always will be that bias toward what makes money. That it's okay, so, and us too, I got to pay for this house. We got to take care of our bills. But can we be a little bit of a difference in that system so that hopefully some accuracy gets out? Gosh, here's the thing. Maybe this is a big one. I can't remember the influencer's name. He's a big guy with brain health. It might have been Perlmutter. I saw on Facebook, it was probably a couple of years ago, he wrote a post that was hey, I used to think this. I can't remember exactly what it was, but I've gotten some new information and now I was wrong. I just want to tell you all I was wrong. I have
Love
never
it.
used so many exclamation points in a response. I was like, dude, this is the thing, and it, but it's not foolproof. I've actually seen some pretty well-known names say like, I'm really trying to push against my bias. If I find new information, I'll say I'm wrong. Well, it's a strategy to get people to trust you. It's not always true though. There has to be some discernment inside of you. Yeah, where maybe you do draw on, you got to have some horse sense still. You can't just this thinking like, oh, this person has all the answers. No one person has all the answers. Very few people are interested in really checking their bias and presenting a very full picture. If there is somebody, and there's one person in particular I'm thinking of who he's actually fascinating to me because his bias is so strong. I'm obsessed with him. I'm like, how did he get here? And his entire website and his entire message is speaking to this one thing and this other thing is terrible. And it's when you see somebody like that, run in the opposite direction. If it's a clinician and they're treating all of their patients kind of with the same, broad brush, that's a sign that things probably aren't going well. If they're parroting what everyone else is saying, but I have to say on the opposite end of that, if I don't know the right word is not coming to me. If they're a contrarian, if they're always saying, look at this, this is wrong. That's to me, the other side of that coin. You might want to be suspicious because sometimes people are right.
Right.
What is the saying? A broken clock is right twice a day. You want somebody who's honest.
So essentially, if someone is deeply dogmatically committed to almost an archetype, right? The archetype of the contrarian, the archetype of the plants are going to murder you.
It's fascinating. He's a specimen. Because did he just start making money off that and he saw that he could get popular and so he just ran in that direction? I mean, from a marketing standpoint, it's very effective.
It is. It's worked well.
But yeah, to me, just as somebody who's trying to step back and see the big picture, I'm like, wow. You couldn't be more wrong.
Right.
But the pearl of truth that is part of the reason why it's separate from him being fascinated, but a very interesting picture is when some people cut out plants, they do feel better.
It's true. And that's the only reason why a message like that could gain any traction is because there's always an element that will find it works for them. And, fucking celery juice.
Totally
right? For 6 months out of 2018, 2019, I don't even remember what year it was. For 6 months, everybody was drinking celery juice. And for many people, it was the first time they had more than half a serving of vegetables in years. So yeah, they were feeling damn good.
Yeah. Yeah. And actually he is, we're, alluding to all these people. It's probably better that we're not naming names. That particular movement, it keeps coming up in my places where I get influence from social media and and I don't know why, but that information keeps coming in. This is the evidence that to me, I'm on the right track. There are documented cases of his followers being so enraptured essentially with his ideas that they stop going to the doctor. They stop getting, screening exams. There's one really famous case of a woman who died, who is kind of, protege. That I can't live with that. I get out of bed every day because if there can just be one person who is oh, maybe I can have a glass of milk that is pasteurized and I'm going to live and it's going to be okay. Or, there's some balance that's put back into the world through the health space where people can get really, really sucked in and influenced to death.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Then I have done my job on this earth. So yeah, I guess to answer your question, there has to be some amount of balance, but that can be really hard. And I'm kind of segueing myself. It can be really hard when people are sick or desperate or they're searching for answers and they've not gotten the answers from conventional medicine or where they've looked.
Right.
And so they turn to this alternative and they think, okay, well, this other thing didn't work. And maybe like you say, they have one little glimmer of, oh my God, I feel better from celery juice. But the reality is very different. They just need more vegetables or they just need a balanced approach. And I think a lot of people, I mean, that's how I got into this world. A lot of people get into this world in that way. But that's a very vulnerable group of people.
Yeah. Yeah. That's true. And I think too, with kind of the history, which I believe is changing, but the history of being disregarded and dismissed by traditional medicine has exacerbated the tendency for people to, follow a contrarian personality and, sip upon their, air quoting again, wisdom, like someone in the desert crawling up to an oasis.
Yeah. And we are that, that is true. I've said this before, and this is totally true. I'm not a scientist. I'm not good with numbers. I'm definitely not good with numbers. I'm not a natural statistician, or I'm not drawn to that naturally. Naturally, I'm drawn to like being out in my backyard, growing food. I'm like a farmer and an herbalist and like a witchy lady. That's, if I, were just left to my own devices, I was an opera singer in a past life, like totally an artist, a writer, poet, like, but the draw to try and find the real story was strong in me that I was like, fuck it. Like I have to go into this world that is totally unnatural to me, very uncomfortable. Like most days at work for me are very uncomfortable, trying to interpret statistics, read through research papers, get the true story. But that level of discomfort, I've made it my job. Most people do not want to experience that, and they shouldn't in their daily life. And they're professionals in other realms. It's like people don't have time to do that. And then the level of discomfort that it takes, it's who would do that? I'm basically like a masochist.
Yeah, I was going to say it's a unique flavor of masochistic kink, basically.
Totally. It's like I'm like a statistics, I have a statistics kink, Aimee. That's, wow. It's really come out in this podcast. Yeah, but so anyway, I guess my point is that like draw for truth, or what will be the best answer for somebody who really, really needs answers. That is what pushes me, but I can totally understand how difficult that is for somebody who, this isn't their job or it's not their interest. And how easy it is to get sucked into the easy answer. It's so easy, right? Especially if like you feel a little bit of an effect, you feel a little better. So I think like when I see movements like totally plant-based, no plants, there's like memes about this, making fun of holistic health and, for good reason. I'm like, of course you're going to jump on that bandwagon if you want an easy answer, if that's what all your friends are doing, or if that's what the popular diet is right now, because the alternative to that is so uncomfortable and so hard. Yeah. I'm like, how can we make the more balanced, accurate thing trendy and popular?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we are pushing against, a very evolutionary lens. I actually am right now looking for either a master's or a doctoral program in evolutionary biology. We're pushing against evolution to try and maintain balance and accuracy. That is not how humans are wired. It's not how we evolved. We evolved with some pretty extreme presses toward bias. It's how I believe that's what I want to study. And I would love to write a thesis. I believe anatomically we are wired for bias. We know emotionally, psychologically, we're wired for bias. So as you and I are having this conversation, and I know your whole goal is, breaking through the bullshit, trends, and like the blasphemous part of what you're doing is actually like, to me, this shining light in the darkness. We're actually working against hundreds of thousands of years of evolution with just telling people stay with the pack, Don't look different. Go with kind of your first instinct. Don't look back. And that's what has gotten us to today. It is how we evolve. We've got to activate our prefrontal cortex ability and our ability to check our bias if we're going to get better. From that perspective, I'm like, whew, how do we do that?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think, like many things, it starts with one deviation from the norm, right? That's how evolution occurs. So as an individual, what I'm hearing is, okay, one, I should probably know what my biases are
Yes.
so that they don't fool me, or they fool me less often, or I can step out of being fooled more quickly, which is, I think, where I'm at right now. I'm more suspicious and come out of being made a fool more quickly. And then have an inherent mistrust for anything that is on the absolute spectrum either way.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Good job. Summary. As a copywriter, I'm like, I maybe should have gotten there a little quicker. No, you did a fantastic job. It's, like you're saying, you have this bias toward produce being good for you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is an important point. Don't get fooled into thinking you don't have a bias. Everyone who's listening, it's very easy to be like, I think I've flushed all those out. It's like, you're programmed, again, to go back to the evolutionary part with, we've been around for like 250,000 years and, this form of human. It's like that has led to you having biases that were necessary for you to live. It's actually a very interesting place to look. If we did not have a set heuristic, like if we didn't have a set way of looking at the world, we would burn so many calories, we wouldn't be able to survive. That is why
we would be thinking everything to death to try and make a decision. Yeah.
So this is also kind of blasphemous. We can go here also. The way that you can see the world without a pattern, a heuristic is just kind of a set way of seeing things, assumptions. We have all these assumptions every day. You have to, right? And the reason that you have to is because it's like, if you've ever taken a psychedelic, it actually shuts down the part of your brain that leads to you having a heuristic, the default mode network.
Yeah.
So yeah, I believe it's a decrease in activity. I'm like questioning myself.
This is why using this as medicine, as they're starting to go back into research and looking at this for treatment-resistant depression, PTSD, et cetera, why perhaps it's one of the killing comments. Because it's dismantling the assumptions that, wow.
Yeah. And so there are other ways to get there. I've actually never taken a psychedelic. Believe it or not.
I'm a control freak. Like I was,
totally.
When all my friends were doing it, I was like, I can't control the trip. I don't know how long it's going to last. I don't know. No. Like I didn't even get drunk till I was like 18. Such a control freak.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. That's next level. I get it though. I mean, but people who have taken a psychedelic, they might be like, oh yes, this, I've just read about it, right? Like the nerdy research reader that I am. You can also get there though through breath work. There are different breath work modalities that decrease the kind of heuristic building ability of the default mode network. And then kids until they're like 7 or 8, kind of right before the hormones start to kick in for puberty, like gentle transition starts, they are always in a mode that does not have a baseline. It's like new, all the time, new, which is part of the reason why I believe, and I'm not,
they're fucking psychotic and a danger to themselves.
Yeah. And they're overwhelmed so easily.
Oh, yeah.
It's like a kid has one little thing happen and it's just like a total meltdown. It's like, yeah, of course. If every single moment, we can't even cognize it unless I think we take a psychedelic and do breath work, but to bring this, back into the science part, it's like, if we didn't have that, we would be a total mess. And from a metabolic standpoint, burning so many calories, we couldn't even live because we're like trying to process, all this information. So it's really helpful that we have these kind of preset biases, but you want to, maybe it's kind of the next step of evolution. If we want to go further in our understanding, in a way, get ourselves out of this mess that we find ourselves in, which is like getting sicker and sicker, younger and younger, more chronic disease, all these things. We're going to have to kind of see past that. Maybe we just all need to have the Ken Kesey put the LSD in the water supply. God. That's totally a joke. Shut down the default mode network, reset our heuristic, go from there.
I just had this thought. I think part of, because I'm in Europe right now, and I live in a multi-generational society. And that's something that we have largely left behind in the States. And I feel that's a piece of collective community wisdom that we've abandoned in favor of the new and shiny. And maybe because, again, broad strokes, making lots of assumptions here. Most of us go through this phase where around adolescence until our 30s, we think our parents don't know shit and they're so behind the times and they don't know what's what. And then, after you drop a kid or two or life knocks you around a bit, you'd come back around and be like, oh, maybe they weren't 100% wrong. And so in my mind, I think our historical culture of having multi-generation small tribal communities allowed us to effectively check our bias against living history that could tell us, give us more detail, give us more perspective than any generation has in their short life.
Aimee, that's really cool to think about. I've never thought about that before. And think about this too. It's like if I go online, which is my main community, I work from home. A lot of people I think are in this position. Or even let's say you're with your coworkers and you have this little kind of like insulated coworker peer group thing. It's very easy to get your biases confirmed.
Totally.
There's a hilarious cartoon that is like this guy going online and he's like, I'm going to find the real answer to this question. And then, the Google search result is like, first result that confirms my bias. And he's like, that's it. I found it. It's like, it's not as easy to get your bias confirmed when you are around many different ages, different opinions, different political views, different experiences. Yeah, it's like, that is so valuable. It's interesting because oftentimes, we're writing content for our clients. Our whole mission is we're going to try and get the most accurate thing. We try and fit that into whatever the client is trying to accomplish in the best way possible. Even people who are like, yes, I love this philosophy. We're going to check bias and try to find, the holes in the thinking. When it actually comes down to it, they're like, hang on a second. Because it doesn't feel good. It's very comfortable. It's like, but I don't know how to say it, the resilience it can build psychologically or in the ability to get information that can actually be helpful, which is the bottom line. It's so valuable. I mean, if it's just like exercise, it is not easy. Well, it is not easy to progressively overload weight and to build muscle mass. It is difficult. This is the same. And really from a practical perspective, to find people who are balanced, to kind of, inherently deeply question people who are really contrarian or people who are agreeing with everything, like people, on the extremes, but also in ourselves, if we notice that we are so quick to be like, I knew it, it's like, we're never going to give this up practice that we do when we're writing content for the agency is we try to do it's called steel manning. We try to steel man the position that we don't agree with. So what that looks like is like, let's say that I'm like, hey, I do think that plants are good for us, which I do. I have a very strong bias. We try to go out and say, okay, hang on a second. What is out there showing that maybe they're not good for us and that would be a better stance to take, or a better recommendation to make? What can we find the strongest evidence possible. That's the steelman part. We want to steelman that opposing position. You're always going to learn something new, whether or not you find evidence that makes you change your position. You're definitely going to learn so much that may even make your position more clear or valuable, or it's going to explain it in a different way. But it's a very uncomfortable process to go through.
Yeah.
So people can do that, though. That is probably the most valuable tool that you could have. If you see something in the wellness sphere and you're like, that's the thing. It's like, go look and see like what like kind of the opposite of that would be, or like some reasons why it maybe is not the best idea. It might take a little bit of time, but you don't have to be an expert in anything to go out and try and find the opposing opinion or a different opinion. Yeah. You're going to have a more well-rounded view of what's happening.
For sure. When you're looking at evidence and you're assessing evidence, like what are some of the questions that you look for and ask yourself to ascertain the strength of the evidence that you're coming across? Because there's shit science that gets published and there's high quality science that gets published. I mean, never mind all the other issues with publication bias and reproducibility, but how do you take a look at a piece of research and, particularly when you're looking at swaths of it, what are some of your quick, no, that's not gonna, no, I mean, do you just read the abstract and keep going?
That's it. Actually, we just read the title and then we're like, that's it. We got it. Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, when you're looking at primary literature, or we're looking at primary literature, I look to see if I recognize the author. If I'm looking at a certain topic for a couple of weeks, I start to see, groups of authors come up over and over. And I'm like, oh, it's like these people have been in this field. I look them up to see, okay, where are they studying? Who are their peers? Who are they doing research with? Because groups get established looking, they're doing bench research in a certain topic. So it's like, okay, who are the people that are in this world that probably know, more about it than I do?
Right. Like Von Lehman and protein.
Yeah, you want to find some names where it's like, yeah, these people are associated with this topic. Totally. So I, kind of start there with like that. I definitely read through the abstract. And then I want to see if the abstract matches. The abstract in a research study is kind of like the first place where the researchers are like, here's what we were examining and here's what we found. I want to see if that matches what is in a section of the paper called the results section. And actually, sometimes you can just look at the graphs in a results section, like the hard data right off the bat to see like, okay, do these two things match? You'd be surprised how often they don't. It's like, yeah, there's some discrepancy sometimes, but then sometimes not, like people have really done due diligence to make sure that there's a match.
And that's the key takeaway there, right? Like if you're looking at research, don't just read the abstract and assume that, whatever suggested conclusion they have at the end is actually represented by the data in the paper. And that sometimes these, I've seen this myself where sometimes the last sentence will be like, it is, based upon the evidence, it is suggested that we perform this action. And then you look at the data and the data doesn't suggest that at all. And it's just like, how does this shit even get published? Which I don't have the answer to that. I probably don't want to know the answer to that because I have a very tenuous grasp of faith in humanity as it is. Let's keep you on that side of the line, Aimee.
I mean, again, it's like there is an aspect of this that I think is important to kind of point out, which is charitableness. It's like, I'm going to give people the benefit of the doubt until they really prove to me that, they're not trustworthy. And I think in scenarios like that, I often kind of try to like put myself in a position where I'm like, people are in positions, academic positions, they have to publish to keep that position. Yeah. They're working a lot of different personalities. It's not usually just one person in a research study. There's like a team of people. They're all, contributing, what they're contributing. Then it's getting peer reviewed. The peer reviewers, in my understanding, it's like they're paid very, very little, or sometimes they're not paid at all.
Most of the time it's a volunteer position. They do not get paid. That's my understanding.
It's like, oh my God, well, what do you want to do when you're done with work at night? Look through, a paper of some people to kind of check their their methodology and like that, or hang out with your family and have dinner. So it's like, here's all of these kind of like places where gaps could show up. And I also think this is a valuable thing to say. You can email paper authors, ask them for a full text copy of their paper, ask them questions about their people. They're not like these like gods that float, above humanity, in academia. You can totally engage with them. And I would say 75% of the time when I've done that, people are just so happy that you've read their little nerdy corner, of the world. Like, oh my God, you want to know about this? They're totally happy to explain. Or I've definitely had people write back and say, hey, that's kind of an oversight on our part. Thanks for letting us know. I've never had somebody write back and be like, absolutely not. You can't have the full text, or we're not going to discuss this. It's like, more than likely, they're curious too. It's why they're in this field. So I think it's good to kind of just break down that perception. It's like that information is coming from somewhere.
Right.
Not interested in, like, information comes from somewhere. It's not the internet, everyone. Like, real information does not come from the internet. It's from science. It comes from either people in a lab doing research and dedicating their lives to a topic, and you can totally interact with those people. You just email them. Or it comes from people being in an office, making observations with hundreds and hundreds of patients. It's very valuable. We also have information that comes from what people have done historically. We have this traditional information. It's like, there's a lot of pearls there that we can draw. And then forget, like, you're a discerning human. It's like part of what we can do to get better understanding if a research study is legitimate or not is just like try to identify our own biases and where we might have gaps with logical fallacies. That would be a whole other cool podcast episode, is just to talk
Logical fallacies. That's a really good idea.
Oh my God. It's like when you start to dig in, you're like, everything I think there's a gap. Oh my God, but it's really a great exercise because, again, it's like, it is exercise. It helps you get stronger. So yeah, it can be difficult. And I'm thinking especially as like, okay, let's say you're somebody who has only ever gone to Chris Kresser's website to read his blogs to get information. Is he giving you the best information? Maybe you've never even looked at a peer-reviewed paper at a primary study. It's not a bad idea if you have a topic that is really important to you that you're trying to figure out. Look at that primary study and just read a little. You're not going to understand everything right off the bat. When you ask me this question, like, how do I discern, strong science from weak science? In my mind, I was like, I'm going to have a better answer for you when I'm like 60. Like, you're 20 years of doing this. Actually, the person who's helping us plan our retirement is like, when do you want to retire? And I was like, what? There's no retirement. I'm not going to get really, really good at this till I'm like 65, 70 years old. So like, I'm hanging in for that, man. That's like when it gets really juicy, is then.
Sure.
But yeah, so it's like you just have to kind of dive in a little and then, use the guidelines that, we were talking about earlier. But yeah, it takes even a long time for people who do this every day to discern.
Yeah. So you were saying one of the key things to look out for is, do the results match the abstract? Is there anything else that, as one is training oneself to have a more discerning eye, is there any other key things that we should be looking for?
I think if the results are like way different than what has been found, and this is hard because it's like, well, way different from what? Way different from what has been found in that field of people who are applying scientific rigor, but that might not be different from what is popular. So that is confusing as hell. It's like, for instance, this is a crossover, but it's a pretty good example. We do not have evidence that plants are bad for us in many research studies. It's like we actually have
a huge gap. People don't look for the opposite of conventional wisdom, that plants are good for you. The question is, how many plants are good for you? Which plants are good for you? It's never,
So it's like that break from what we've seen in thousands of studies for this person to say, actually, plants are toxic and you just should avoid them. And, rattling off all of the like chemical constituents that sound really fancy that, that's actually a perfect example of logical fallacy. I'm again going off on a tangent. When somebody's like on TikTok and they're like at a grocery store and they're like, carrots contain gain and I don't even know the freaking terms. It makes you think, well, God, they know their shit. But it's a trick. It's like, yeah, plants do contain all that shit. When you look at the research literature, it's awesome for you. It's not actually hurting you, but it makes you think they really know what they're talking about. Anyway, so
a great example of this that comes to mind is in processed foods. They will sometimes, particularly breakfast cereals, I've noticed. I mean, I haven't looked in a long time, but they will use tocopherol as a preservative. Sounds horrific, but tocopherol is vitamin E.
Totally. Yeah, one of like the strongest antioxidants on earth. It's like, yeah, it keeps things from breaking down a small area. Yeah, there's all these little like, kind of landmines that, to pay attention to. But yeah, it's like, if something is very, very different from what is established, you might be like, really? Like, what's happening there? This is a little more detailed. So the abstract, what is it? The
abstract and then the results. Do they match?
Do the curtains match the drapes? That's really good. If you're looking for, do those things match? Is it way out in left field compared to what else has been found, scientifically, what we know? If it's like a really extreme result, you might be like, I'm going to look around a little bit to see what the full story is. This gets a little more in the weeds, but I think it's really important. Sometimes claims are made about, let's say, like a supplement. This is pretty popular. Or even a drug, actually, that it does X, Y, and Z. So let's say, I'm not actually going to wade into the pharmaceutical literature here. I'm just going to stick with supplements. Let's say that
I'm so wanting to go there, and I'm like, I've recently talked about it, so maybe not. Maybe we'll just leave that on the table for now.
That might be a part 2. We can go talk about absolute versus relative risk and statin drugs and like that. But for right now, let's. So what can often happen is, okay, let's say that people say like, okay, green tea and the constituents in green tea help you burn fat. Very, very powerful. Help you lose weight. Okay.
I remember reading that in undergrad.
Yeah. And so it's like, okay, wow. Green tea helps you lose weight. There's green tea everywhere. It's all around like that. You kind of have to start to ask yourself like, well, like how much green tea and how much weight? It's like, okay, does it help you lose like a half a pound every 3 months? Maybe it's not going to be worth, you drinking this thing that, if you like green tea, great, go for it. There's all kinds of benefits. But like, if you're doing it just for weight loss, like it's kind of bitter. Maybe you don't love it. It's expensive, whatever. You kind of have to start to wonder, like when you see a claim, okay, X might produce Y, but like how big is that effect that it has? And that's something that I see a lot in all realms. And I really love the promotion of teaching, holistic or functional clinicians this, or people who are minded like that, because it's a very important part of what we find in research is like, there might be an outcome that is positive, but if the effect is not big enough to make a difference in your life, who cares? It doesn't matter.
And what is statistically significant in research is not necessarily clinically relevant in the real world.
Yeah, it's.
I haven't looked at the green tea research since the early 2000s, because that's when I first looked at it. And what I recall is it was at that time, digging into the literature, it basically came out to like, if you drink 5 cups of green tea a day, you'll burn an extra 80 calories. And I'm like, there's not really anything to write home about. That's like, oh, great, I get a slice of Wonder Bread. Woo-hoo. That's because, that's low fat.
That's how I'm going to spend those 80 calories. I mean, green tea has a lot of great effects. It's not just the weight loss, but to make the point, like to kind of look at it in this reductionist way, we need to understand how big an outcome is to know, if it, like you're saying, statistical significance, something can be statistically significant. And in our minds, significant has a meaning. We think, oh, significant means it's worthwhile. I think that's how most people translate it. Like it's substantial.
That's how it's used in common language.
But significance is a statistical term with a very specific statistical definition that is not common language, right? Yeah, like you're saying, it has a different meaning, but people don't know that. So they hear statistical significance and they're like, well, it works. And it's like, yeah, it might work a millimeter amount, but you need something that works like at least an inch, hopefully. I'm trying to like translate this. It's like,
and I mean, that also in terms of how wording is used in common day versus research, like another area aside from the word significance is the word risk, right? Because the media will always say, reduced risk of X by X. And because the everyday person doesn't understand the difference between relative risk and absolute risk, they don't bother to clarify that in the news article, but like that is the most important part of that word is whether it's an absolute risk or a relative risk increase or reduction.
Yeah, we see that in so many different outcome reports. Actually, just recently, we've done a work for a client where we've looked at absolute versus relative risk for all kinds of interventions. So drugs, supplements. It's like totally eye-opening where you're like, wow, even things that I thought maybe, would reduce risk or increase risk in a way that was significant to real life, that was substantial in our real life. The risk is not, very big, or the risk reduction on, posing is not very big. It's a little bit of even a conversation that I'm sort of uncomfortable having because I'm like, I don't know if I could do it justice to explain well enough. Like I can explain the concept, but like the details of that, unless I had like a research paper in front of me and I could show you the way that it's reported it's not transparent. What happens is that in a paper, the authors will report relative risk, which makes the risk of something happening or the risk reduction of an intervention like vitamin C seem really, really substantial. And you're like, whoa, this is a huge risk. I need to pay attention to this, or this leads to a huge reduction of risk for this, disease or like that. This is really powerful. But if you look at the statistic that is really the most accurate for our lives, which is absolute risk, you see that many, many times it's like, wow, the risk of, this thing it's not very big, or like the amount of risk that this intervention reduces is not very big. There are, however, researchers who are speaking out against this, and they're publishing papers saying we have to stop reporting just relative risk.
Oh, like that's awesome.
They're totally out there. This has been a few years ago, I want to say, in JAMA. There was a paper. I could send it to you if you want to put it in the show notes so that people can look at it.
Yeah, that would be great. That would be great.
They're speaking specifically to the reporting around statin drug outcomes.
Oh, and so you send that.
Yeah. And it's, there may be other papers where the authors have done this, but it's the only one that I've seen where the authors are like, we got to stop this shit. And they use statin drugs as their example for why they want authors to report both of these statistics. There may actually be usefulness for both of those, but it's not useful in a real world setting to just use relative risk. You need to see the actual risk, not compared to anything else, which is what absolute risk reports. And it is hard to be charitable in that situation because what it looks like, and I don't know if it's true, but what it looks like is that relative risk is reported so that the authors of the study, the creators of the drug, the creators of the supplement can claim that there is this huge risk reduction that is going to happen, with this particular intervention. And it seems really substantial to us when we read it, when the reality is like, if you're not comparing, if it's not relative to something, if it's absolute, if it's overarching risk reduction, the effect is not very big. So it's hard to be charitable in that situation, because it's like, well, of course, everyone wants their study or, their drug or like that to be the most effective.
Yeah.
And
the prettier the research looks, the more likely you are to get grants and funding for more research, the more established your career becomes, right? Like, again, when people's livelihoods hinge a lot on how
it's
popular and printable research is.
Yes. And listen, I'm kind of like in the media realm. Like, I'm not some like famous science journalist or anything. We're just doing our little marketing agency thing. But like, journalists who are good science writers, like good science journalists, they ferret this out. Like, there are more people, than just us out there talking about this. Or like I said, I'll send you that paper where these researchers are publishing like in huge journals, like, hey, we got to not do this anymore. This is actually a good, like, practical takeaway. When you read about a study in the news, and you see the same headline reported over and over, or in the newspaper or online or like that, you have to really question, not that the is doing a bad job, but like, it takes something to interpret a research paper really, really well and transparently in a way that is accurate.
Yeah.
You might want to look into it yourself. If it's a topic that is important to you and impacts your life, and don't just take their word for it.
Yeah, for sure. One of the things that I talked about in the episode that I recorded that was released right before this one will be released is that difference between relative and absolute risk. And I came across a paper where the authors said absolute measures should not be used in observational studies of associative relationships, nor should relative measures be used in clinical trials of causative relationships. And I was like, yes, that so succinctly sums it up.
Yeah. And, I'm glad you said this kind of at the beginning of when we were talking. It's like, change is happening. It's the only way for us to get into more accurate territory, more useful territory for people is like incrementally. This isn't going to be just like we're going to wake up one day and this is different. Same with conventional medicine. It's like there is a wave of change where doctors are like, oh shit, we need to listen. We can't just be on the computer. Oh yeah, we can still do physical exams. It's like, it's not everywhere, but like, we live in Boston part-time. I can totally see it there. It's like, I think it's really important to recognize, like, yes, okay, this is working. Otherwise, we're just kind of like in a dungeon, like slipping away, and not seeing any progress. It's like, no, there is light that's starting to crack through. People are becoming more aware of this. I mean, this podcast is a perfect example. It's like you're trying to put information out that is as accurate and practical as possible, give people tools that are empowering so that they can see through, the bullshit. It's like, I love that this is blasphemous nutrition. Hopefully at some point, this isn't blasphemy anymore. It's just like, oh yeah, this is critical thinking. This is how we need to think if we're going to get someplace that's worthwhile, because we're definitely not going to get there with just like churning money for the status quo,
right?
Which is a lot of wellness medicine. All of it has been for years, and look where we are. Same with, the food industry.
Yeah.
Any industry.
Once it gets degraded down to being about quarterly shareholder profits, it's lost its soul.
Usually worthless. Yeah. It's like, great. Yeah. Let's do that well, I'm not in those industries, but I'm just thinking like with technology or, like if it's not health related, it's like maybe there's some application for that. When you're dealing with people's lives, that's like what I always come back to is like, there are ways for people to feel joy and capability and function and, like live vibrant, beautiful lives. But we have to give people the information that they can actually use to get there in conventional and functional. right? It's like we're both guilty.
So for sure, for sure.
Nobody is exempt from this. It's like there are shysters everywhere. And again, sometimes I think it's not conscious. It's just like people go with their unconscious bias and they don't look back. And all of a sudden, they've blogged and sold supplements their way into like hurting people. It's like, I'm sure the medical medium did not start out thinking, I want to like harm all these people, but sure as shit, here he is doing that. It's like, I don't think anybody starts out that way.
Nobody thinks of celery juice as being something that could kill you.
Yeah. Or like that maybe.
Or that they would take it, that they would take something that far.
Maybe. But the point is it's like that discernment, whether or not you ever read a primary study, bring in your street smarts.
Yeah.
You have, it's like, don't let go of what you've learned in your life as a human being.
And if you don't have street smarts yet, like start picking them up, right? Like
you're
start.
Gonna get it if you're in this world.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Just
stick around long enough.
Yeah,
you're going to make a couple things.
You're totally going to get on. Yeah. And just remember, it's like, it is a business. Everything is a business. It is a business. There are the rare examples of people who are just so passion driven. I see that in our clients every day. It's so beautiful. It's inspiring to me. Hannah and I are not making millions of dollars. It's like, nobody gives a shit about a balance.
I hear that.
Why? Yeah. But it is my hope that we can educate people, like try to see through that story. Try to get what is actually helpful for you as a human being that is actually going to heal you and help you with whatever, problem that you're looking to fix, because people don't get into this world because they feel great. It's like they get into this because they've got something going on. But yeah, that level of discernment it's going to save you so much money actually, and time and energy and heartache.
So if you were to give our listeners one or two action steps that they could start taking like this week to hone that kind of those street smarts, to start to determine for themselves what information they're getting is worth investigating further and what should be discarded, what would be a couple of things that you would recommend for them to get started on that process?
Look for people with a balanced perspective who are willing to admit that they changed their opinion and they actually change it. They don't just keep saying the same shit over and over, right? It's like they're actually changing it. If something is really extreme one way or the other, I see this in functional medicine a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Really contrarian personalities that everything that comes out, like, that's not the full story. It's like, maybe it is, dude. Like, maybe it is. And on the other side, it's like, this is exactly what the story is. It's like, be wary of that. Try and prove the opinion that is the opposite of yours, right? That steel manning process.
Yeah.
And that's a very well-known kind of rational science strategy. So, people can Google Steelman and see what that process is. But it's mainly like, if you have a belief that's really strong, what's the opposite of that belief? And can you find evidence that backs that up? That's really legitimate. What's the best evidence to prove your opposing point of view? That's a great exercise. Use your street smarts for sure. It's like street smarts and health is like, there's some basic things that you need. You need to be out in the sun. You need to drink enough water. You need a balanced diet with enough macronutrients. Eat some colorful foods. Eat things that you like. I think that gets looked at a lot. Like, pleasure is a part of our experience as human beings. It's not just about like downing, like liver smoothies and, whatever. It's like, yeah, eat some pancakes in a warm bath. It's totally okay. Okay. That's going to help you.
About as much fun as me drinking my coffee in the shower, which I have been known to do.
Yeah. There has to be some pleasure in there. And that's, I think, a good marker. If you're following somebody and you're like, God, it's so stringent. Like, I see recommendations sometimes and it's like, there's memes about this too that I think are hilarious. Get up at 3 a.m., go on your first run, do your meditation.
Like Huberman for 6 weeks. Here's what happened.
And I'm like, look, it's okay if you get up at 7:30 or 8 o'clock in the morning. Maybe you need that sleep. It's all right. I think that's part of using your horse sense. It's like, if it's so stringent that it feels overwhelming to you, it's probably not going to heal you up.
Yeah.
Like, the solution can't be more stressful than the problem. So if you've information that feels that way, maybe question it a little bit. There might be another way, or just take parts of it that work for you. If you are looking at primary literature, make sure that the abstract matches the results, that the outcomes, are not just these like completely novel. I mean, maybe you have stumbled over an Easter egg of people who have really found something new. More than likely in the world of wellness, unless, if you find a study that's like, you have to eat a low protein diet and it's the only way to keep yourself healthy. It's like, well, was it in rodents? Was it in humans? Think balanced, big picture, what are the findings in the context of what else that we know, not just as a singular finding.
Don't extrapolate a single piece of research to mean more than what it says exactly in the research. So hard.
Yeah. There's like I guess maybe there is a big picture that has to be communicated that is often not communicated. And all of these little details that we're speaking to, I think, fit into that big idea. As I was saying about the protein research, it made me think of this because I'm like, there are studies that show that a low protein diet might extend lifespan. What about health span? Do you want to live your life sarcopenic with muscle wasting in a hospital bed for the last 10 years? A low protein diet might be a good idea. It's going to extend your life. But if you look at the health span of a human, feed some muscles. Even the way that you stimulate that is through protein and picking up things that are a little heavier than a glass. It's like, there's differences there. So there is a big theme of this, which is like, you have to kind of think about what is the big picture? What is the full story? And maybe not in a way that tortures you, because that can happen, but just assume that maybe you're not getting the full story all the time and try and find the full story. That's the best way I can wrap it up in a bow.
Awesome. Awesome. What's one thing about you? And I feel like you've already shared so many things about you already, but I'll still ask you anyway. What is one thing about you that some people might find blasphemous?
Oh my God, Aimee. What is it? I'm like, just one thing.
Oh no, if you have a laundry list rolling in your head and they're fighting to get out of your mouth, like just let it go.
I think the main thing is like, this is probably what it comes down to for me. People get so pigeonholed into like, they have to eat this, do this, and did it, and did it, and did it. And I do too, right? It's like, it's a good feeling because it really like cements that illusion of control, right? Or that we're going to get better, which is a whole other topic, right? It's like, I'm going to feel better. I'm finally going to be where I want to be. Yeah. There is so much more to life than that. And I've actually pissed peers off. I used to teach at a nutrition school, and I remember a teacher I was teaching with at one point was like, you can't tell our students this. And I was like, this is the most important thing.
You couldn't tell students not to chase perfection in health?
Well, there is just like this overarching message that I wanted to get across, which is like, don't forget that it's not all about just trying to get your blood sugar balance. And it's not all about just your little physical health. Like sometimes, paradoxically, the best thing that you can do is just forget about it for a second and go on a walk or go volunteer and get out of your head or like eat pancakes in a bath. Like the thing I believe that fuels a human more than food is we have this like, it's like our connection to who knows if whatever's out there. I'm totally agnostic, but I kind of lean towards there's something out there that created us. Maybe it's just energy. Physics is fascinating. If I was better at math, I'd totally be over doing physics. But we had this like complex, like chemical electronic brain structure and this spine that runs the whole show. It's like our connection to God, right? We have this pineal gland, these very powerful, like glandular influences from our nervous system that don't have anything to do with food or supplements or information. It has to do with feeling and impressions and like, it's our experience. Yeah. It's like, and I think that gets so lost in the minutia of bullshit that we're just inundated with 24 hours a fucking day. It's like, no, you got to, it's not just electronics. It's everywhere. Shut it off. Get into your own space. You have interoception. You can feel your own body. What makes it feel good? Get influenced by that. That is the influencer that you need to be listening to, is your own nervous system. What makes you feel calm? What makes you feel good and warm at home in your body? It might not be what is, popular in medicine or what is happening in the functional, influencer realm.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to keep coming back to this because it's totally my thing that I love to do. Eating a stack of pancakes and a hot bath. That might be what you need. It might be like listening to David Bowie on full blast while you clean your house stoned. I don't know what it is for you, but that is the direction to go in to really get the best perspective of all of this other stuff, because that's what it is. It's connecting into that impression side of us. That is the part that allowed us to evolve to where we are now. That is what I believe is the most important.
So that balance between like our animalistic intuition and that sensory experience of what it means to be alive, balance that with all this like massive influx of information and all of the stuff that's coming at us all the time about what we should or should not be doing in every single aspect of our lives.
Yes. And our work. And I mean, I can feel it in me. I get so wound up, and actually not in the food world anymore, but in career. Adi Ashanti is a spiritual teacher, and he had this kind of like little saying, but it was also visual. So he would like hold his hand in a fist and he would be like, not this. And then he would open his hand and he'd be like this. That's the thing. It's like, that's what I think we're all chasing, is that release, that opening, that ease.
Right.
And I don't see that as being in line with all of the glut is the perfect word to me of this and control and information and this amount of hours a day, do this. I just want to like connect it to this. I think we have this idea that if we do X, Y, and Z and down the whole freaking alphabet, that our symptoms are going to go away. Our joints are not going to hurt anymore. Our skin is going to clear up. We're going to like get there.
Let me just follow this protocol because it's worked for so many people. Like I have done that. I have done that myself.
Even if you get the most involved, bio-individualized, functional blood chemistry, research-based everything, you may not have perfect health. The reality, though, is that your life is still totally worth living in whatever level of disability you have.
Mm-hmm.
Fucked up skin. That's my personal thing. Is like, I have horrible rosacea. Sometimes it works that it goes away. Sometimes it doesn't. I'm not going to stay at home. I'm not going to not live a beautiful, joyous life because of that. So it's like, I think sometimes that's really important for people to hear, is that if you have this perfect physical outcome, health outcome as your goal, you might need to refocus, because you're always going to be striving for something that could be impossible. And that will always keep you buying the next supplement. That will always keep you buying the next protocol or going to the doctor for the next drug or the next operation or like whatever you need to get there. You may not get there.
Yeah.
Learn how to live with where you're at.
Damn.
It's not easy. It's not easy. I mean, I'm saying that as somebody who like literally before we started this call, I'm like peeling the skin off my face because my rosacea is flared so much right now. I know more than 99% of people on earth about physiology. I can't figure it out. It's like, okay, well, fuck, it hurts. It sucks. Next, I can't just live my whole life trying to do this, right? Because it connects into, there is this huge, beautiful world that we need to experience. I'm not going to get on that train of like just trying to perfect this to death. So yeah, I would say like in our world, that's a pretty blasphemous
I concur. I concur. Like I hear money staying in wallets, the absence of money being spent with that statement. And again, that's fairly blasphemous in this industry.
Totally. Or like insurance premiums not being met. It's like sometimes you just have to like sit still and see what comes up. And it's uncomfortable, but
yeah, for sure. I have absolutely loved talking with you today. It has been so much fun. Yeah. And I think I want to bring you back to talk about statins because that's super important.
Yes. Yeah. I'm going to have to get brushed up. I'll send you that study. That was a huge one that I was so impressed. Not only that these authors published the study, but the JAMA published it saying like,
yeah, JAMA showed up and published it anyway. Yeah. I mean, kudos to them.
Yeah.
Well, all right, then until next time, thank you again for our conversation. And oh my goodness, if people want to find you, my dear.
Yeah, how do they? So yes, I own a research-based marketing agency, the LaFont Agency, and that's our website. It's the LaFontAgency.com. That's what we are on Instagram. My name is Victoria LaFont. Jackson is my married name, so I'm on Facebook. But yeah, come check out our website.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Aimee.
If you have found some nuggets of wisdom, make sure to subscribe, rate, and share Blasphemous Nutrition with those you care about. As you navigate the labyrinth of health advice out there, remember, health is a journey, not a dietary dictatorship. Stay skeptical, stay daring, and challenge the norms that no longer serve you. If you've got burning questions or want to share your own flavor of rebellion, slide into my DMs. Your stories fuel me, and I love hearing them. Thanks again for tuning into Blasphemous Nutrition. Until next time, this is Aimee signing off, reminding you that truth is nuanced, and any dish can be made better with a little bit of sass. Any and all information shared here is for educational and entertainment purposes only and is not to be misconstrued as offering medical advice. Listening to this podcast does not constitute a provider-client relationship. Note, I'm not a doctor nor a nurse, and it is imperative that you utilize your brain and your medical team to make the best decisions for your own health. The use of information on this podcast or materials linked to this podcast are at the user's own risk. No information nor resources provided are intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Be a smart human and do not disregard or postpone obtaining medical advice for any medical condition you may have. Seek the assistance of your healthcare team for any such conditions and always do so before making any changes to your medical, nutrition, or health plan.